The Pacific morning air was cool and salted, rolling off the coast of Monterey in thick, misty waves. The cliffs above the bay had already begun to glow under a hazy sunrise, and below, the water whispered against the rocks. A fishing boat named the Lively Tide swayed gently on its mooring, its nets coiled like sleeping serpents along the deck. Below the surface, a young sea otter darted between kelp stalks, her sleek brown body weaving through the dense underwater forest with practiced grace. Her name, though unknown to humans, was something close to Kea. She was barely 2 years old, newly independent and hungry, her black eyes alert and curious. Kea had been tracking a school of sardines when she ventured too close to the edge of the open water near the boats. The net hit her before she registered it, a silent trap that clung to her hind legs and tail. Panic surged through her as she struggled, twisting and biting, but the mesh tightened, cutting into her fur. Her heartbeat drummed faster as air bubbles erupted from her nose. She surfaced once, then again, squeaking in distress, her body twisting like seaweed in a storm. On the bluff overlooking the bay, 26-year-old marine biologist Ethan Moore was sipping coffee from a thermos and watching the horizon through binoculars. Tall and wiry, with sun-bleached hair and a face that looked permanently windburnt, Ethan had grown up a few miles inland in Salinas. He'd returned to the coast after finishing grad school at UC Santa Cruz, drawn back by the very creatures that had fascinated him since childhood, especially the otters. He spotted the flurry of movement in the water and adjusted the lens. What he saw made him lower the thermos, fast. An otter thrashing, rolling unnaturally, caught in something. "Damn," he muttered, dropping the binoculars into the grass. He sprinted to his truck, where his kayak was lashed to the rack. Minutes later, Ethan paddled furiously into the surf, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times before. As he neared the otter, he could hear her keening squeaks, pitiful and panicked. It's okay," he murmured, as much to himself as to her. He slipped on his diving gloves and slid into the water. Kea thrashed when he approached, her eyes wide and full of instinctive fear. Ethan moved slowly, trying not to startle her more than she already was. The net was wrapped around her legs and part of her belly, strands twisted into tight knots. "I've got you," he said softly. "Just hang in there." It took him several agonizing minutes underwater, using a diving knife to carefully cut the threads. Twice she tried to bite him. Once he almost lost his grip as a wave rolled them. But finally the last thread gave way, and Kea surged upward, gasping. Her fur was torn in patches, and one flipper was bleeding, but she was free. She swam a short distance away and floated on her back, chest heaving. For a moment she stared at Ethan, wide-eyed, not running, just watching. Ethan floated there too, breathing hard, the adrenaline ebbing in his veins. Back on shore, he wrapped the soaked wetsuit tighter and called the local marine mammal rescue hotline. "Otter caught in fishing net," he said. "Female, young. I freed her, but she's injured. We need a team out here." They dispatched a crew, but by the time they arrived, Kea had vanished into the kelp forest. Later that day, at the Pacific Coast Wildlife Center, Ethan stood in front of a room of young interns and volunteers. Behind him, slides showed tangled fishing lines, ghost nets, and injured marine animals. "This isn't a one-time incident," he said, pointing to the image of Kea's bleeding flipper. "It's happening up and down our coast. Ghost gear kills indiscriminately. If we don't change how we operate, how we fish, how we respond, we'll lose more than otters." A woman in the back raised her hand. "What can we do?" Ethan paused, looking around. This had been simmering in him for months, and now the fire had caught. "We need a full-on program, real-time monitoring, community reporting, cleanup dives, education for fishers, enforcement of lost gear retrieval. Not next year. Now." A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan knew it wouldn't be easy. Funding, politics, bureaucracy. But the image of that terrified otter wouldn't leave his mind. Back out on the water the next evening, he spotted Kea again. This time she was floating calmly among the kelp, grooming her fur, her tail still healing but no longer trembling. They stared at each other across the water. Neither moved. Then she dipped below the surface without a sound. Ethan sat there a long time, drifting in the fading light. Tomorrow, he would start writing grant proposals. Ethan Moore sat cross-legged on the floor of his small one-bedroom apartment, stacks of folders and grant applications scattered around him like a paper ocean. It was nearly midnight, and a dim desk lamp cast tired shadows on his face. The blue light of his laptop screen flickered as he typed, his fingers stiff with exhaustion. Marine Wildlife Recovery Initiative, Phase 1 Proposal. He read the heading again, then looked to the whiteboard he had scribbled across 2 days earlier. Arrows, bullet points, and messy handwriting outlined a vision he could barely believe had formed so quickly. Cleanup dives, net recovery efforts, public awareness campaigns, an otter rehabilitation fund, a hotline, a mobile unit. The image of Kea trapped and bleeding still haunted his thoughts. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every marine creature out there that didn't get a second chance. The idea of saving even a handful of them made the sleepless nights worth it. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, then reopened them as the soft buzz of his phone rattled against the table. A message blinked from his colleague, Dr. Alicia Kern. Got your draft. Strong. But you'll need community buy-in or the council will never approve the pilot zone permit. Start local. He sighed, stretching. She was right. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife wouldn't greenlight anything near the coast without demonstrated public and political support, especially not on short notice. Outside, the wind howled faintly along the Monterey shoreline. The ocean never slept, and apparently, neither would he. The next morning, Ethan stood in front of a small community meeting at the town library. The audience was a mix of curious locals, skeptical fishermen, a few environmentalists, and the mayor herself, a sharp-eyed woman named Caroline Mason. "I'm not here to ban fishing," Ethan said plainly, addressing the tension in the room. "I grew up here. I understand the livelihood. But ghost nets and abandoned traps are killing more than fish. Otters, sea lions, even seabirds. It's a silent massacre. And we have a chance to stop it." "By restricting our waters?" a man in the third row barked. He wore a faded baseball cap and the deep tan of someone who'd lived on the water longer than Ethan had been alive. "You biologists always want to fence off the sea." Ethan shook his head. "Not fencing, partnering. We want to work with the local fishing community. We'll help track lost gear, fund recovery, even reimburse in some cases. But we need your cooperation." The room was silent for a beat. Mayor Mason folded her arms. "And who's paying for this?" she asked. "Because I'm not asking taxpayers to subsidize another failed grant project." Ethan met her gaze. "Private sponsors. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration might back the initial phase. I'm writing grants this week. I'm not asking for city money, just city permission to start." A teenager in the back raised her hand. "Are you the guy who saved that otter last week?" Ethan turned. "Yes. Her name's unofficial, but we've been calling her Kea." The girl beamed. "I saw the video on TikTok. That was awesome." Suddenly, the room began to shift. One by one, people murmured. Some leaned toward one another. The gruff fishermen didn't look convinced, but others seemed less hardened now, softening at the mention of something real, something they could picture. Mayor Mason gave him a long look, then nodded once. "You've got 60 days to show progress. That's all I can give you. No PR disasters, no delays." Ethan almost smiled in relief. "That's all I need." By the end of the week, Ethan had recruited 4 interns from UC Santa Cruz's marine program and signed a partnership agreement with the local dive club. With their help, he organized a Saturday cleanup dive just outside the harbor, a test run. They found 5 fishing lines, 3 plastic lobster traps, a cracked crab cage, and a section of ghost net tangled so deep in the rocks that it took 2 divers nearly an hour to cut free. One of the interns, Leo Nguyen, surfaced with a look of alarm. "We found bones in one of the traps," he said grimly. "Looked like a sea lion pup." Ethan felt his stomach clench. "Photograph everything. Log it. We're building our case." The team gathered the debris on the dock, laying it out like evidence in a courtroom. Locals came to watch, some skeptical, others clearly shaken by the sight of sea-encrusted cages and the remains of what might have been a young animal. Ethan didn't waste the moment. He launched into an impromptu explanation, speaking from the heart. "This is what happens when gear is left behind. It doesn't just sit there. It kills. Slowly. Painfully. This is the problem we can solve, but only if we face it." A woman in the crowd clapped, then another. Within moments, a wave of applause rippled through the group. Even the gruff fisherman from the library meeting, now leaning against a post nearby, gave a single thoughtful nod. Later that night, exhausted and salt-streaked, Ethan returned to the kelp beds where Kea had been spotted. The moon hung low over the ocean, casting long silver trails over the water. He waited quietly in his kayak, drifting, listening to the rhythmic lap of waves. Then he saw her, floating near a patch of moonlit kelp, still cautious but visibly stronger. "Hey girl," he whispered. She turned toward him, then rolled into a dive and disappeared. But he knew she'd be back. As the cold seeped into his wetsuit, Ethan smiled faintly. The ocean was vast. The threats were many. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something crack open in his chest. Not just resolve. Hope. The sky over the California coast turned gray with coastal fog as late April unfolded. Fishing boats dotted the horizon, a dozen shapes barely visible through the veil of mist. Beneath the surface, the kelp forest swayed slowly in the tide, vast golden-brown towers stretching toward the sun. Somewhere within that tangle of life, Kea, the young sea otter, had carved out a new routine. She was healing. Ethan could see it in her more fluid dives, her longer time underwater, her increasing curiosity. But there were still risks everywhere. Back on shore, Ethan stood in front of a corkboard in the Pacific Coast Wildlife Center's new temporary command room. Really just a repurposed storage office with a busted air vent and the smell of salt-soaked carpet. A large map of the Central Coast was tacked to the wall. Pins and colored threads connected recent reports of net entanglements, trap sightings, and suspected ghost gear locations. Each cluster told a story, a dangerous one. Alicia Kern stepped inside with a coffee in each hand and a skeptical brow. Your volunteer dive team logged another crab trap with a sea bass carcass near Point Lobos yesterday. The plastic netting had barnacles 6 months old. Ethan took the coffee. That's the third in a week near that cove. We've got a problem out there, Alicia said. Someone's fishing illegally, out of season, leaving trash behind. And the otters are swimming right through it. They both knew the stakes were rising. More ghost traps meant more animals caught, and not every otter would get lucky like Kea. Alicia leaned on the edge of the desk. We need enforcement involved. Ethan grimaced. You think Fish and Wildlife will listen to us? Only one way to find out. They met with Agent Rob Salazar the next day at the Marina field office. A tall, no-nonsense man with a military bearing and a badge that gleamed against his windbreaker. Salazar didn't bother with small talk. You want me to patrol for illegal traps in open water based on volunteer dive logs and a few photos of sea bass bones? They're not just bones, Ethan replied. They're indicators. Evidence of illegal activity. Damaging protected species habitat. Salazar crossed his arms. You got GPS coordinates? Ethan slid over a printed report, meticulously compiled by Leo and the other interns. Salazar skimmed it, then paused. What's your angle here? You trying to ban fishing? No, Alicia cut in. We want to protect the wildlife and support sustainable fishing. That's why we're proposing a joint task zone, shared monitoring, shared cleanup. No one's getting kicked out. Salazar stared at the papers. You got political support? Mayor Mason gave us 60 days, Ethan said. We're down to 42. Salazar sighed. I'll send a patrol boat out next week. Don't expect miracles. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. By the second week of May, Ethan's project, now officially named the Marine Wildlife Recovery Initiative, MWRI, had gained traction. The team's dive logs were going digital. They'd collected over 400 pounds of ghost gear from the ocean floor in less than a month. A crowdfunding campaign had raised nearly $12,000, but not everything was progress. One afternoon, Ethan arrived at the docks to find 2 of his volunteers, Leo and Mia, sitting on overturned buckets, looking rattled. A torn piece of netting lay beside them. What happened? He asked. Leo ran a hand through his wet hair. We were doing a shallow dive near the south buoy. Some guy in a skiff came up, yelling that we were trespassing, said we were messing with his traps. Did you get a name? He wouldn't give it. But I got a photo of the boat, Mia added, pulling out her phone. Ethan studied the image. The boat had no visible ID, but the man's face was clear. Late 50s, bearded, red windbreaker, angry. Send this to Salazar, Ethan said. And be careful. Don't confront anyone again. That night, Ethan drove north to Moss Landing, where a local fisherman's town hall meeting was taking place in the community gym. He wore jeans, a faded blue hoodie, and a notebook tucked under his arm. Inside, tension rippled through the crowd. A group of commercial crabbers sat in a cluster near the front. Behind them, charter boat captains. Ethan recognized a few faces. One was the man from Mia's photo. As he took a seat in the back, the man in the red windbreaker stood up and spoke, his voice sharp and biting. People like this Ethan Moore are trying to kill our industry. You all saw what happened. He's got kids diving into our zones, pulling gear, talking trash about ghost traps. If we don't stop this, we'll all be out of work in 5 years. The room murmured in agreement. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He stood up. With respect, he said loudly. You're wrong. Every eye turned to him. The red-jacketed man narrowed his gaze. I'm Ethan Moore, he said, walking forward. And no one is trying to shut you down. I grew up fishing these waters. My uncle was a crabber for 30 years. But the ocean's not a bottomless pit. If we don't take care of it, there won't be fish for anyone, let alone otters. You calling us careless? The man snapped. I'm saying accidents happen, Ethan replied. But leaving broken traps out there is like setting bear traps in a playground. We can do better. Silence followed. The room hung in a tense quiet. Then, from the back, a wiry man with white hair spoke. My grandson found a dead otter on the beach last week, tangled in plastic. It had bite marks on its own legs. Looked like it chewed itself bloody trying to get out. He looked at the red-jacketed man. You want to argue with that? The next morning, Ethan sat on a driftwood log near the kelp beds, exhausted but quietly proud. The tides were shifting. More volunteers had signed up overnight. A pair of local captains had emailed offering safe boat access for divers. And out among the golden seaweed, Kia surfaced. She floated on her back, paws folded against her chest. For a moment, she gazed at Ethan, completely at peace. Then she rolled over, diving deep into the green-brown forest. Ethan watched her disappear, heart full. The war wasn't won, but the battle was real, and now he wasn't fighting it alone. The sun emerged over Monterey Bay, scattering gold across the rippling waves and outlining the fog in delicate ribbons. From the rocky edge of Point Pinos, Ethan stood with a cup of bitter coffee in hand, watching the ocean pulse. Below him, the shoreline glittered with salt spray, and the familiar smell of seaweed mixed with diesel from distant boats. Everything was deceptively calm, but Ethan's mind raced. They were now 30 days into the 60-day window Mayor Mason had granted, and while the momentum of the Marine Wildlife Recovery Initiative had picked up, so had the resistance. The fisherman in the red jacket had a name. Curtis Dale, owner of Miss Jenna, a crabbing skiff with a history of operating in gray legal areas. And now Curtis wasn't just shouting at meetings. He'd taken to online forums, local radio, and barroom gossip to stir anger against MWRI. He'd called Ethan a radical college kid and accused the program of scare tactics. Worse, someone had vandalized the small shed where MWRI kept their dive gear, slicing oxygen hoses, smashing 2 underwater cameras, and leaving a net draped like a noose across the entryway. It had rattled the team. Leo, Mia, and the others had stayed, but they were shaken. Ethan had called the police, filed a report, and even installed a motion-activated camera, but no one had been caught. You're making waves, Alicia had told him grimly. They've noticed, and they're afraid. Afraid of what? Change. Later that afternoon, Ethan and his team held an outdoor community event near the harbor. They set up informational tables, marine life displays, and even a tank with a rescued starfish and sea cucumber for children to observe. A banner reading, "Protect what you love," fluttered in the breeze. It started slowly. A few families wandered by. A couple of middle-aged divers stopped to talk about their own ghost gear finds. A retired teacher donated $50 after seeing the footage of otters tangled in plastic. But then something strange happened. A young girl, maybe 11 or 12, approached the tent, holding a clear plastic container with holes poked in the lid. Inside was a limp juvenile sea otter, eyes barely open, fur slicked down by what looked like oil. My brother found her near the breakwater, the girl whispered, almost in tears. She's breathing funny. Ethan was at her side in seconds. Did you see oil on the beach? She nodded. Near the rocks. It smells weird. Adrenaline kicked in. Ethan shouted for gloves and towels, lifting the otter with careful urgency. The small creature, no more than 6 pounds, wheezed as it struggled to breathe. Ethan could feel its heartbeat through the towel, frantic and faint. Leo, get the rescue van running. Mia, call the wildlife vet at the center. Tell them we're en route. Within minutes, they were racing inland. The vet, Dr. Helen Alvarez, was already gloved up when Ethan carried the otter into the clinic's sterile bay. Lights flickered on above the metal examination table, and the team went to work. Fluids, oxygen, soft wipes to remove the clinging black residue. They worked in tense silence as the otter let out a weak chirping cry, softer than Kaya's had ever been, more like a lost child than a wild animal. Where did the oil come from? Dr. Alvarez asked. It's not crude. Looks like engine lubricant. Industrial. Ethan's mind raced. Curtis Dale's boat? Other small craft? Maybe a leak? I'll send a sample to the lab. But Ethan... She paused, stroking the otter's paw gently. If she's got oil in her lungs, we may not save her. Ethan swallowed the bitter knot forming in his throat. We have to try. By nightfall, the otter, nicknamed Luna by the little girl who found her, was stable but unconscious. She lay curled under heat lamps in a recovery basin. The team rotated in shifts to monitor her vitals and keep her hydrated. Ethan sat beside the tank, eyes red, knuckles white around his notepad. He scribbled without thinking. 3 otters in 30 days. 5 traps with bones. 200+ pounds of gear recovered. Illegal fishing confirmed. 1 act of vandalism. 1 oil leak. No arrests. No funding approval. No council guarantee. Alicia walked in quietly and read over his shoulder. You're measuring the tide, Ethan. He didn't look up. We're running out of time. Then let's change the tide. 2 days later, Agent Salazar called. We boarded Miss Jenna, he said over the line. Found cracked oil drums, improperly sealed. Curtis denied everything, but we've got photos, and the sample you submitted matched. Ethan stood in stunned silence. What happens now? Fine. Possible suspension. If it's proven he dumped the oil intentionally, he's done. And the net vandalism? No proof, but we're watching him. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt something close to justice. On the coast, Kia returned. He saw her during a solo kayak patrol. She floated in the shallows, resting, still scarred but healthy. This time, when she noticed him, she didn't dive. Instead, she paddled closer, curiosity brimming in her eyes. Ethan smiled, heart full. You're getting braver, girl. Kia dove, resurfaced with a clam, and floated again, cracking it open on her chest with a rock. It was a small thing, but it meant survival, recovery, life. Ethan drifted there for a long time, watching her eat, the late afternoon sun flickering like gold coins on the waves. But just as he turned back toward the shore, his radio crackled. Ethan, come in. It was Mia, voice tense. We've got another otter, caught near the pier. This one didn't make it. The words hit him like a wave to the chest. Hope and grief, twinned again. The sun was just a pale smear behind thick marine clouds as Ethan parked his dusty Toyota Tacoma outside the Pacific Coast Wildlife Center. The call from Mia still rang in his ears. Another otter. Dead this time. He stepped inside, greeted by silence. The usual buzz of volunteers, interns, and phone calls had faded into a hush that clung to the walls. Mia stood by the exam room door with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes were puffy, her shoulders tense. They brought her in about an hour ago, she said quietly. Too late. She was tangled bad. Her back flipper was nearly severed. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Was it Kea? Mia shook her head. No. Juvenile. Male. Less than 2 years old. Probably born the same season. They walked into the room together. The otter lay on the table, still and wet. His fur was stained reddish where the nylon netting had cut deep into flesh. His mouth was slightly open, teeth bared in a silent grimace. Beside the table lay the piece of net. Coarse, sharp-edged plastic, knotted and weighted with steel rings. Old, sun-faded, and very familiar. Curtis again? Ethan asked bitterly. Not confirmed, said Leo, entering with a clipboard. But the knotting matches the illegal crab traps we found last week. No ID tags, no float marker, just dumped. Ethan's jaw clenched. He's pushing back, hard. It's not just him, Mia added. There's talk now. More traps going down overnight. Like they're making a point. Ethan stared at the dead otter's glassy eyes. They're sending a message, he said. And we need to send one back. By late afternoon, Ethan was back in his kayak, slicing through gray water like a scalpel. His heart hammered with frustration, but his mind stayed sharp. The water was colder than usual for May. The kind of chill that crept into your bones no matter how well your wetsuit fit. He paddled toward the cove near Point Lobos, where Kea had often been seen. She hadn't surfaced since the last sighting, and he needed to know she was okay. Halfway there, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He dropped the paddle and raised his binoculars. A sea otter, floating alone. Fur slick and dark from the wet, too far to make out scars. "Kea?" he called softly. The otter dipped below the surface. Ethan sat still, watching the ripples fade. His radio buzzed at his hip. "Alicia to Ethan, you there?" He clicked it on. "Go. We've got an emergency. Salazar's patrol just caught someone dropping untagged traps from a skiff near Pebble Beach. They need a biologist on site to document the gear." Ethan gripped the radio tighter. "Is it Curtis?" "No. Different boat. Name's Bonnie Jean. Registered to a Captain Ray Henley." Ethan exhaled. So it wasn't just Curtis. There were more. "I'm on my way." By the time Ethan arrived at the marina station, the skiff had already been towed in. 2 uniformed officers stood beside the open truck bed where the confiscated gear was stacked. 3 crab traps, one partially loaded with sardine bait, the others empty but damp. A man in his early 60s stood nearby in handcuffs, red-faced and muttering under his breath. Salazar waved him over. "We caught Henley just off Pebble Point, no permit, no tags. Dumping deep nets into a protected otter habitat zone." Ethan knelt beside the gear. He tugged at one of the knots, tight, crude, fast-tied. This wasn't commercial work. This was desperation, or protest. "He say why?" Salazar gave a humorless smirk. "Says the green kids ruined his route, that he had no choice. Said the government was letting the otters take over." Ethan stood disgusted. "We're not trying to take over anything. We're trying to keep balance." Try telling that to a guy 3 months behind on dock fees. That night, Ethan sat alone on the beach, a thermos of cold coffee in his lap, his notes spread out on the sand like driftwood. The wind cut along the shore. Every report, every sighting, every gear log. He read them again, looking for something he hadn't seen. Then he heard a faint splash. He turned. Just beyond the foam line, a small brown head bobbed up. Bright eyes, a round face, scar near the left flank. "Kea." She floated closer than usual, only 20 feet away, then rolled, showing her healed tail. Still limping a little, but alive, strong, watching him. Ethan couldn't help but smile. "Still here," he said. "Still fighting." The next morning, Alicia called him into her office. "I got word from the mayor's office. The city council's holding a vote in 10 days. Ethan's heartbeat picked up. "On what?" "On whether to allow MWRI to establish a permanent recovery zone. 2 miles of protected habitat, full dive access, and a no-trap rule during peak breeding season." He blinked. "That's huge." "It's also political," she warned. "Curtis and his people are rallying opposition. You've got 1 shot to convince the council, 1 meeting." Ethan sat back, the reality hitting him. It wasn't just about dead otters and broken gear anymore. It was about policy, community, legacy. "If we don't get this vote," Alicia said, "our funding dries up. We lose access. And those otters?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. For the next 10 days, Ethan worked like a man possessed. He met with dive teams, prepared presentations, filmed interviews with interns, and asked locals to record video messages of support. Children who had visited the center drew pictures of otters and kelp and handed them to him with hope in their eyes. He edited everything into a 10-minute film. Kea's Coast, a story of survival. On the morning of the vote, he stood before the city council in a packed town hall. Camera crews buzzed in the back. Fishers stood along one wall, arms crossed. On the other, families, students, divers, and volunteers filled the seats. Mayor Mason gave a nod. "Mr. Moore, you have the floor." Ethan stepped up. He didn't start with data, or graphs, or science. He started with Kea. Ethan stood at the center of the Monterey City Council chamber, the silence thick enough to feel. The room was at full capacity. Students from UC Santa Cruz lined the back wall. Cameras rolled from 2 local news stations, and the Fishers Union had claimed a solid block of seats to the left, their faces stony and unreadable. Mayor Caroline Mason sat with her hands folded, watching Ethan intently. To her left, 5 council members sat behind their raised wooden desk, some already glancing through the paperwork before them, others watching the crowd for reactions. Ethan took a breath, then he spoke. "I'd like to begin by introducing you to someone." He clicked the remote. Behind him, the projector flared to life. The first image was of Kea, tangled in netting, bleeding, eyes wide with panic. Gasps rippled through the audience. "This is Kia," Ethan said. "A young sea otter I found entangled in ghost fishing gear off our very own coast 30 days ago. She was lucky. We got to her in time." He clicked again. The screen now showed volunteers retrieving sunken traps, otters with scarred flippers, and sea lions swimming near floating mesh. "But not all of them are. Not the one we found last week. Or the one before that. They didn't survive." Click. The footage transitioned to the cleanup dives. Mia and Leo surfacing with coils of plastic netting, volunteers hauling bags of debris onto the dock, school children drawing pictures of sea otters beside posters that read, "Protect what you love." "We aren't asking for much," Ethan continued. 2 miles of coastline, seasonal protection zones, shared data between conservationists and the fishing community. We want to work together, not against each other. But if we do nothing, we lose more than wildlife. We lose our identity as a coastal community." Someone in the audience clapped, then another. Slowly it spread. Ethan lowered the clicker. Mayor Mason leaned forward. "Thank you, Mr. Moore. Council will now deliberate." The deliberation took nearly 40 minutes. The council members spoke in circles. Economic concerns, precedent, enforcement logistics, community divisions. At one point, a councilman expressed worry that such a program would set a standard that might scare off future commercial interests. Alicia, sitting beside Ethan, whispered, "Translation. Some donors are leaning on him." Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the bench. Finally, Mayor Mason raised her gavel. "We will now proceed to the vote on Resolution 14B, authorization for establishing a marine wildlife recovery zone and permitting full implementation of the MWRI program." One by one, the council members cast their votes. "Councilman Alvarez?" "Aye." "Councilwoman DeVries?" "Aye." "Councilman Brecker?" A pause. "Nay." A murmur ran through the room. "Councilwoman Kim?" "Aye." It was 3-1. Then all eyes turned to the final council member, Richard Leland, a tall, slow-spoken man with deep ties to the fishing community. He looked tired, thoughtful, and undecided. Mayor Mason tilted her head. "Councilman Leland?" He stared across the room, at the pictures of dead otters, at the children clutching drawings, at Curtis Dale scowling in the third row, and then at Ethan. "I lost my boat in 97, he said suddenly. "Crab season was bad. Gear got cut in a storm. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't think it mattered." The room stilled. But it did. That gear didn't just disappear. It killed things. Things I couldn't see, so I pretended not to care. He looked down, then back up. "I vote aye." A loud exhale swept the crowd. Someone cheered. Another clapped. Mayor Mason smiled. "Motion passes. The Marine Wildlife Recovery Zone is officially approved." That night, Ethan stood on the bluff, wind cutting at his coat. Below, the dark ocean pulsed with the steady rhythm of tides that cared nothing for human politics. He was tired. Too tired to celebrate. But the exhaustion carried a different weight now. A quiet sense of victory. Not total, but enough. Enough for now. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Alicia. "Luna's awake, breathing strong. She might make it." He grinned, and then he saw her again. Kea. She surfaced just off the kelp bed, bathed in the light of a rising moon. She floated with a calm certainty now, no longer wary. Her silhouette bobbed in rhythm with the sea, like part of it. Ethan raised a hand in greeting, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought she stayed longer than usual, watching him. But just when the tide seemed to be turning, the ocean reminded him that it never promised fairness. 2 days later, during a routine dive with Leo and Mia, something went wrong. The water was rougher than expected, the currents strong. Leo had gone ahead to recover a particularly tangled net reported by a kayaker. Ethan had been trailing behind, checking the reef for new debris. When he surfaced, Leo wasn't with them. "Mia?" he called out. She turned sharply. He was just here. They began searching, calling, diving again. 10 minutes passed, then 20. A shadow under the surface. Then Mia shouted, "There!" Leo was floating near the rocks, tangled himself, in a torn crab trap, one of the old-style steel frame types. His oxygen hose was kinked, his eyes wide. They dragged him to shore, cut him free, started CPR. But it had been too long. The paramedics tried everything. But Leo didn't make it. The news spread fast. A marine biology student, A volunteer. A son. Gone in service of a cause that suddenly felt far more fragile. Ethan sat outside the wildlife center that night, a knot in his chest that refused to untie. He'd led this, pushed it forward, risked others. Mia sat beside him, silent, her eyes swollen. "His parents are coming in tomorrow," she whispered. "They want to see this place, where he worked, what he believed in." Ethan nodded. He believed in this. "I know. So do I." A long silence. "Then we finish it," Ethan said. "Even if it costs us?" He looked to the ocean. It stared back. "Especially then." The morning after Leo's death was impossibly quiet. The sea, usually Ethan's place of solace, now looked foreign, indifferent and vast. In the stillness, every sound felt sharp. The cry of gulls overhead, the rattle of a window pane in the wind, the distant creak of boats shifting against their moorings. Ethan stood on the back deck of the Pacific Coast Wildlife Center, staring out over the dunes, his hands buried in the pockets of his jacket. His mind played Leo's last dive over and over, each second dissected, second-guessed. Should he have noticed the current pulling harder? Should he have kept the team closer? Behind him, the center was full of motion and sorrow. Volunteers moved slowly, quietly. Some brought flowers, others sat on benches without speaking. The corner of the lobby had been turned into a memorial. A photo of Leo smiling, arms full of tangled net, beside a clipboard where visitors could leave messages. He died doing something that mattered. Someone had written in green pen. Ethan read it twice, heart twisted with guilt. Mia approached, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "I can't stop thinking about his parents," she said softly. "They're due in an hour." Ethan nodded. "I don't know what I'm going to say." "Just tell the truth." He looked at her, shadows under his eyes. "That it was my fault? That he believed in this? Because he did. He wrote it in his journal." She handed him a folded piece of notebook paper. "I found this in his locker. He was writing reflections every week for class credit." Ethan opened the note. "I never thought ghost nets could kill more than animals. But now I know. It's not just about otters. It's about responsibility. If we lose the coast, we lose ourselves." Ethan's throat tightened. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it in his chest pocket. "I won't let him be forgotten." When Leo's parents arrived, they didn't cry. Margaret and Thomas Nguyen were composed, dignified even, as they toured the center. Margaret walked slowly along the hallway, pausing at the pictures Leo had taken during his dives. Thomas didn't speak much at all, but he kept one hand on his wife's shoulder at all times. Ethan led them outside, to the main marine rescue tank, where Luna, the young otter rescued from the oil incident, now floated under soft sun lamps. She was healing well. Her fur had grown back, her appetite had returned, and she now recognized Ethan's voice, often rolling in the water when he spoke to her. "This is Luna," Ethan said. "Leo helped save her." Margaret smiled faintly. "He told me about her in his emails, said she was the quiet kind of strong." They stood there for a long while. Finally, Thomas turned to Ethan. "Are you going to stop the program?" The question hit like a stone. Ethan looked at them both. "No, we're going to finish what he started." Thomas nodded. "Then use his name." "What do you mean?" "Name it after him. Make sure people remember. Leo died because the ocean wasn't safe. Let them see that. Let them know he was real." Ethan swallowed hard. "We will." The next week, the program was officially renamed the Nguyen Initiative for Marine Wildlife Protection. The announcement came at a public event, held on the wharf near the harbor. Ethan stood at a temporary podium, flanked by Alicia, Mayor Mason, and a now visibly recovering Luna, cradled safely in a portable enclosure. The turnout surprised everyone. Dozens of people showed up. Fishermen who once opposed them, students in dive suits, tourists who'd heard about the tragedy on the news. Even Curtis Dale stood in the shadows at the back of the crowd, arms crossed, watching. Ethan spoke with a calm, focused voice. Leo was more than a volunteer. He was a protector. He didn't just clean the ocean. He believed we could build something better. So we're doing that. In his name. For the otters. For the coast. For all of us. He paused. And we're not just picking up trash anymore. We're changing the way our coast is managed. Alicia stepped forward. Starting next month, with state backing, the Nguyen Initiative will be launching a permanent underwater monitoring station installing biodegradable gear drop boxes at all public boat ramps, and partnering with the Fish and Wildlife Service to enforce no dump zones along the protected kelp beds. Applause broke out. Not polite, not quiet. Real. Ethan caught sight of Mia in the crowd, tears in her eyes. He knew what she was thinking, that it was working, that Leo's loss hadn't been for nothing. That night, the wind howled across the water, but Ethan wasn't afraid of it anymore. He launched his kayak from the harbor alone, paddling out into the dark, guided only by a headlamp and the silver strip of moonlight on the tide. He didn't go to the usual kelp beds this time. Instead, he headed for the far cove, where Leo had died. When he reached it, he let the kayak drift. Silence. Stars. The steady creak of the boat. Then a sound. A splash. Gentle. Rhythmic. He turned slowly. Kea. She surfaced barely 10 feet away, as if called. Ethan smiled, eyes stinging. "Hey there, girl." She floated beside the kayak for several long moments, then swam in a slow arc around him. Not afraid, not hurried, as if she understood something had changed, as if she too had lost something, and had come to honor it. The next morning, construction began on the underwater station. Ethan oversaw the anchoring of cameras, acoustic sensors, and gear detection nodes into the rocky seabed just off the newly designated protected zone. Divers secured solar-powered beacons to the surface buoys. Volunteers handed out biodegradable mesh bags to local fishers, explaining how they could now trade in damaged gear for replacements, no questions asked. The community was still divided. Some remained skeptical, but more and more were coming around. A charter captain named Elena Ramirez approached Ethan as he checked the equipment log. "You're making it harder to ignore," she said. "The ocean's cleaner already. We're trying. You've got my boat next week, free. Use it for training runs." He blinked. "Are you serious?" "I lost my brother to a net tangle off Santa Cruz 12 years ago. Nobody listened back then." Ethan held out a hand. She shook it. Another tide turned. But not all was calm. That night, as Ethan reviewed footage from the kelp cameras, something jolted him upright. A new trap. Visible. Dropped just outside the recovery zone boundary. No tag, no buoy. Fresh. He grabbed his radio. "Mia, get Salazar. We've got another illegal drop." Then, another thought. Kea often swam that stretch at night. He switched camera feeds. Waited. And there she was, floating dangerously close. Ethan's heart pounded. Then, on the edge of the frame, movement. A boat. Unmarked. He leaned in, jaw tightening. This wasn't over. The footage looped again and again on Ethan's laptop screen, each rotation carving deeper into his nerves. The camera, anchored just outside the MWRI protection zone, caught everything. A small unmarked boat drifting into frame under cover of darkness. The soft splash of a heavy object slipping beneath the surface. And moments later, the telltale rise of a net trap settling toward the seabed. There was no license number, no running lights, nothing legal. But what turned Ethan's stomach was the last few seconds of the recording. A young sea otter, Kea, gliding toward the drop site. She wasn't in danger yet, not visibly, but the net was fresh, unwatched, a silent predator lying in wait. Ethan slammed the laptop closed. He grabbed his phone and dialed Salazar. "It happened again," he said. "I've got footage." "You get a plate number?" "No, but I got the boat. Clear profile." "Send me the clip. I'll loop in the harbor patrol." "Too slow," Ethan snapped. "We need someone watching that site tonight." A pause. Then, "I'll see what I can pull. But don't you go out alone, Ethan. I mean it." Ethan said nothing, and hung up. An hour later, Mia walked into the lab, hair damp from her dive shift, fatigue in her eyes. Ethan didn't look up as she entered. He was checking maps, overlaying recent illegal trap sightings with Kea's movement patterns. It was becoming a lattice of overlapping danger zones. The otters were drifting into traps faster than the team could log and remove them. "We need to tag her," he muttered. "Kea, we need to know where she's going in real time." Mia stepped forward. "You said we'd never collar her." "I know, but if she gets caught again, we may not find her in time. That net was laid 20 yards from her last sighting." "Ethan," Mia hesitated. "Even if we tag her, it doesn't stop the nets." No, but it gives us a warning. He finally looked up at her. Would you help me catch her? She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. That night they launched under moonlight. The kayak rocked gently as Ethan and Mia paddled toward the quiet kelp forest near the newly marked illegal drop. The water was glassy, the stars high and scattered like spilled salt. They'd brought a soft enclosure, an otter-safe sedation kit, and the tagging collar, lightweight, low profile, designed to fall off after 90 days. It was their best shot at keeping Kia alive. The night air was cold, briny, and carried the heavy scent of kelp. Ethan felt it in his bones. Tonight was important. More than important. It was necessary. Mia scanned the water with infrared binoculars. There, she whispered. South side of the rock, floating. Ethan adjusted his paddle and turned silently. Sure enough, Kia was resting on her back, grooming. She looked peaceful, unaware of the trap that waited just beyond her reach. Mia readied the net. Now? She asked. Ethan hesitated. His heart thundered in his chest. Then he gave a nod. Mia cast the soft net gently, letting it land like a curtain across the water. Kia startled, flailed, but Mia moved fast, securing her without injury. She's okay, Mia whispered, lifting her into the kayak's central cradle. Ethan moved quickly with the sedation patch, just a trace dose to calm her. Kia's breathing slowed, but her dark eyes stayed open, blinking sleepily. Ethan stroked her damp fur as he secured the tag. I'm sorry, he whispered. We just want to keep you safe. They brought her back to the center to recover for the night. Ethan refused to sleep, staying by the tank with Mia. At dawn, Kia stirred, stretched her legs, and gave a sharp chirp. Time to go, Ethan said. They released her at sunrise. She slipped into the waves like she belonged there, because she did. By midday, the tag was pinging. Kia's movements were graceful, purposeful, tracking the edge of the kelp forests, hunting, grooming. But then, in the early evening, the tracker blinked yellow. Stationary, Ethan said. Too long. Mia looked up from her desk. You think she's tangled again? I don't know. Could be resting. Could be worse. He didn't wait. They launched a search boat. Alicia radioed patrol to meet them. At the drop site, the water was still. Too still. Ethan dove first, a spotlight mounted on his dive mask. He scanned the ocean floor with trained eyes. Algae waved gently across the rocks. Schools of silvery fish darted past. And then, there, a trap. Old style, square frame, no float, fresh cord. And caught on the edge. Fur. Brown. Shimmering. Moving. Kia. She was alive. Struggling. Trapped by the leg. Ethan surged forward, pulling his dive knife from the sheath on his chest. The mesh had twisted tightly, cutting off circulation. Kia was flailing, but her strength was fading. He worked quickly, fingers numb from adrenaline and cold. The cord was wet and slick, but finally, snap. The last strand gave way. Kia drifted free. She didn't swim away immediately. She floated, stunned. Ethan cradled her gently in his arms, surfacing with her chest to chest. Mia and Alicia hauled her aboard. We got her, Ethan gasped, pulling himself over the side. She's alive. The patrol boat arrived minutes later, sirens silent, crew alert. Ethan handed over the net fragment. Same design, he said. No tags. This is the third one this week. Salazar scanned it. We're close. Someone's getting nervous. They should be, Alicia added. Back at the center, Kia recovered quickly. The leg wasn't broken, just bruised, with a shallow cut. Ethan applied topical treatment and monitored her movements for 12 hours. She healed fast. By morning, she was grooming herself again, and chirping, loudly, almost defiantly. Ethan knew what needed to happen next. He scheduled a public press conference on the beach, right at the edge of the recovery zone. The media showed up in force, so did locals, so did Curtis Dale. Ethan stood in front of the cameras with Mia and Alicia behind him. This is the net that almost killed Kia, he said, holding up the recovered piece. Again. He let the silence settle. She was saved because we tagged her, because we were watching. But this can't happen again, and it won't. He pointed to the water. We're expanding the protected zone. We're installing real-time motion sensors. And if you're dropping untagged gear in these waters, we will find you. We will prosecute you. You don't own the sea." Applause broke, and, from behind the crowd, Curtis Dale turned and walked away. Fast. That night, Ethan sat on the edge of the pier alone, Kia's latest ping blinking steadily on his phone. Safe. Drifting. Then a buzz. A message from Salazar. "Boat ID confirmed. Bonnie Jean, owner's cousin of Dale. Arrest warrant issued." Ethan exhaled. For the first time, it felt like the ocean was listening. But storms return, and he knew the calm was only temporary. The wind picked up just after sunset, curling through the cypress trees near the shoreline and howling between the docks like a warning whispered in code. Ethan stood outside the Pacific Coast Wildlife Center, eyes narrowed against the salt spray, as the coast prepared for another Pacific squall. He could feel it in his bones. Something had shifted. Not just in the air, in everything. The arrest of the Bonnie Jean's owner had sent shockwaves through the community. Salazar confirmed the charges: multiple counts of illegal gear deployment, unlicensed marine activity, and reckless endangerment of protected species. The boat had been impounded, the net seized, and the footage Ethan supplied had been submitted as part of a growing federal case. For a moment, victory felt within reach, but almost immediately the backlash began. Local radio filled with bitter interviews. Anonymous posts on community forums accused MWRI of spying on fishermen, destroying local tradition, and even fabricating animal threats for grant money. Ethan's personal email was flooded. Some were messages of gratitude, but others were vile, full of threats and rage. Someone spray-painted "traitor" on the Wildlife Center's gate. Curtis Dale was seen handing out leaflets downtown, rallying a new wave of resistance under the name Save Our Shores, ironically framed as a defense of historic fishing rights. Mia found a dead fish nailed to the center's front door. Ethan sat in his office, staring at it after the officers had taken the report. "They're scared," Alicia said. "Which means we're close." "Close to what?" he muttered. "Another attack?" "No," she said softly. "To real change." But real change didn't come easy. Kaya's tracker pinged inconsistently over the next week. Some days, she stayed within the recovery zone, sleeping in the kelp, hunting along the safe stretches of seabed. Other days, she wandered close to danger again, the unprotected shoals just outside the legal buffer. Ethan knew why. Otters didn't recognize boundaries drawn by people. They followed food, instincts, territory. Kia was curious, strong, but still vulnerable. And the people laying those illegal traps? They were getting better at hiding them. Then came the report from the drone team. A student intern had been flying survey drones above the coast when he caught footage of a new vessel. It wasn't Bonnie Jean. It wasn't Miss Jenna. It was a small white speedboat with a camo tarp-covered deck, unregistered, untraceable, operating at twilight just beyond the buffer zone, and it was laying something in the water. When the drone zoomed in, it caught a glint of stainless steel, a row of spiked cages. "This isn't crab gear," Mia said, watching the footage. "Those aren't traps. They're snares." The room fell silent. "Designed to kill," Alicia whispered. Ethan stood, heart pounding. "They've escalated." The footage was sent to Salazar. Within hours, a state marine crimes task force was activated. Patrols increased. Underwater cameras were adjusted to wider ranges. The MWRI team began working in 12-hour shifts, scanning the sea not just for wildlife, but for signs of sabotage. The line between conservation and warfare had blurred. One evening, as Ethan walked the pier alone, he found himself wondering how far it would go. Would someone eventually attack them directly? Would they sabotage a dive, hurt a volunteer? He looked out at the ocean, its surface rippling under a bruised purple sky. Somewhere out there, Kaya floated, unaware that her very survival had sparked a conflict far beyond her understanding. And Leo had given his life to protect her world. Ethan gripped the wooden railing, jaw tight. "Not again," he murmured. The next morning he met with Mayor Mason. She was calm, but firm. "This is bigger than the council now. The governor's office called me. NOAA is watching. So is the press." Ethan nodded. "Then let's finish it." "I need something from you," she said. "What?" "A full proposal. Expansion of the zone, full surveillance, emergency response team, and educational integration in the public schools. Show them this isn't a protest. It's a new standard." Ethan blinked. "That'll take a month." "You have 7 days." Those 7 days became a blur. Ethan barely slept. He worked through the nights, drafting maps, cost breakdowns, impact assessments. Alicia handled legal language. Mia helped collect public testimonials and footage. Even the volunteers rallied, offering video interviews, charts, photos. Kia's image became the symbol, not just of an otter, but of everything at stake. The living, breathing heart of the coast. Children drew her. Divers painted murals of her. One girl, no older than 8, handed Ethan a postcard at the dock. It had a drawing of Kea in a heart and read, "Thank you for saving her. Please don't stop." Ethan taped it to the inside of his office window. On the 7th night, with the final report submitted, Ethan returned to the beach where Leo's vigil had once been held. The sky was clear, stars infinite. He stood at the edge of the surf, letting the cold water lick at his boots. Then, movement. A ripple in the moonlight. He raised his binoculars. Kea. She was floating lazily, rocking in the tide, paws folded across her chest. Ethan watched her for a long time. Then, suddenly, another shape surfaced beside her. Smaller, fluffier. A pup. His heart leapt. She'd had a baby. Somehow, in all the chaos, she'd survived and given life. Ethan laughed quietly, stunned. "She's a mother," he whispered. The camera around his neck clicked. He captured the moment, barely breathing. A single sea otter had led him here. And now, she was no longer just a survivor. She was a matriarch of the future. But joy never came without shadow. 2 nights later, the surveillance buoy off Point Lobos was destroyed. Cut cables, smashed casing, intentional. And Kea's tracker? Dark. No signal. No movement. Gone. The silence was the worst part. Not the shattered buoy. Not the cut cables. Not even the spray-painted slur someone had scrawled on the dockside wall the same night. It was the silence from Kea's tracker. Ethan hadn't slept in 2 days. He sat in the Wildlife Center's monitoring room, eyes fixed on the screen. Kea's last ping had been logged near the outer edge of the buffer zone. Then nothing. No signal. No motion. No drift. It wasn't just a tag failure. She was gone. Mia walked in, holding a thermos. She placed it silently beside him and sat on the floor, knees drawn up. "She might have just moved out of range," she offered softly. Ethan shook his head. If the buoy hadn't been destroyed the same night, maybe. But this was targeted. "We don't know that." "We do." His voice cracked. They'd lost so much. Leo, equipment, time, and now Kea. Kea, who had become more than a symbol, more than a wild creature. She had been their heartbeat. Ethan stood abruptly. "I'm going out." Mia looked up. "Now?" "Yeah, I need to see for myself." He launched from the southern jetty just before dawn, the wind rough and the water choppy. Waves slapped the hull of the small motorboat as he headed toward Kea's last known location. The clouds were thick, hiding the sun, painting the sea in dull pewter tones. He wore his wetsuit, his dive gear prepped beside him. The boat bobbed violently as he anchored and slipped over the side. Underwater, the world was muted and blue-gray. The kelp forests swayed like cathedral curtains. Shadows drifted. His flashlight cut through the murk. Nothing. No trap. No net. No body. He surfaced once, caught his breath, then went down again. The second dive brought him farther east, deeper into the slope where the seafloor dropped off. Then he saw something. A tag. Glinting. Floating on a strand of kelp. Kea's collar. Snapped loose. No blood. No body. Just the tag. Ethan's hands shook as he lifted it to the surface. She had shed it. Intentionally? Unlikely. But she was alive. He had to believe it. Back at the center, Alicia ran diagnostics on the tag. "It looks like the release was clean, not chewed or broken." "So she outgrew it?" Mia asked. "Possibly. Or it just detached early. We can't say for sure." Ethan leaned against the lab bench, exhausted. But no body, no fur, no wound. "No," Alicia agreed. "Which means—" "She's still out there," Ethan said, eyes brightening faintly. "Maybe even protecting her pup." That afternoon, the governor's office called. The proposal had been reviewed, the evidence considered. The videos of the illegal traps, the destroyed buoy, the drone footage, and the arrests had made their way up the chain. And the final ruling came. Statewide funding for coastal recovery zones. Not just in Monterey. All along the California coast. Ethan could hardly believe it. The Nguyen initiative would serve as a pilot model for the entire system. Training, oversight, gear exchanges, underwater sensors, youth outreach. It was happening. Kia had sparked something bigger than anyone imagined. 3 months later, a small crowd gathered at the shoreline for the unveiling of a new marine rescue building. A sleek, solar-powered facility with tank systems, a small lecture amphitheater, and state-of-the-art monitoring tech. The plaque near the entrance read, "The Leo Nguyen Center for Marine Protection, in memory of a protector of the coast." Ethan stood before the crowd, flanked by Leo's parents, Alicia and Mia. Children sat cross-legged in the front row, each holding a plush sea otter. The mayor spoke first, then Alicia. Then Ethan took the podium. "I never knew what one otter could do," he began. "I never thought a single encounter could change everything. But I met Kea, and she changed my life. She made me see what we stood to lose, and who we had already lost." He paused, breath catching. "We've built something here, not to control the sea, but to respect it, to protect those who can't speak for themselves." He looked out at the water. "If Kea's still out there, I hope she knows. She started this." 1 week later, Ethan sat alone at the water's edge, camera in hand, scanning the horizon. He didn't expect anything. The sea was as mysterious as it was wide. Then, ripples. Small. Deliberate. He raised the camera. There. An otter. Scar on the left flank. Eyes sharp. Wiser. Beside her, floating awkwardly, was a pup. Tiny. Clumsy. Curious. Kia. She looked straight at him for a moment, then flipped on her back, paws on her chest, her baby climbing clumsily onto her belly. Ethan raised the camera, clicked, then lowered it. Some moments don't belong in headlines. They belong in the heart. Months later, MWRI's expansion swept up the coast. New chapters formed in Santa Barbara, Mendocino, and even Oregon. Ghost gear reports dropped by 40%. Otter populations in protected zones stabilized. Schools began teaching marine conservation as part of science curriculums. Curtis Dale? Convicted on multiple charges. No one spoke his name at the docks anymore. And Kea? She was never tagged again. But she was seen. Once a month. Sometimes more. With her pup. Then a second pup. The next season. She remained a guardian of the kelp. Unbothered by headlines. Untouched by politics. Just living. Just wild. Just free.